What if the scariest part of a night spent with a stranger is realizing you may never actually know who they are? That unsettling idea sits at the core of You'll Never Find Me, 2023, a claustrophobic psychological thriller that transforms a single location into a battlefield of paranoia, shifting truths, and psychological dominance. From the opening moments, the film establishes an atmosphere of discomfort rather than action. A confined space. Two strangers. A storm cutting off the outside world. And a growing sense that nothing said inside that space can be fully trusted. What begins as an uneasy encounter slowly evolves into a psychological duel where words matter more than weapons. One of the film's strongest themes is perception versus reality. Every conversation feels slightly misaligned, as if both characters are operating with different versions of truth. The audience is constantly forced to question whether what they are seeing is objective reality or filtered through fear, manipulation, or emotional distortion. That uncertainty becomes the film's main engine of tension. Another key theme is control. Not physical control in a traditional sense, but conversational and psychological control. Each character attempts to steer the narrative, define the situation, and establish dominance over interpretation. But as the night progresses, control begins to shift unpredictably. Sometimes silence becomes power. Sometimes confession becomes a weapon. One of the most effective techniques in the film is its use of space. The entire environment feels both protective and suffocating at the same time. Walls that should feel safe begin to feel like traps. Doors that represent escape also represent exposure. This duality reinforces the psychological instability of the situation. A subtle but important detail is how the film manipulates time perception. Without external references like daylight or consistent activity, the audience experiences the same temporal distortion as the characters. Minutes feel longer than they should, and uncertainty stretches every interaction. That distortion increases paranoia. Another layer of the film is identity ambiguity. Instead of clearly defining who holds power or moral authority, the story deliberately keeps both characters in a shifting moral gray zone. Every revelation complicates previous assumptions, forcing constant re-evaluation of who might be trustworthy. The horror does not come from external threats. It comes from the collapse of certainty. As the narrative progresses, emotional pressure replaces physical escalation. The tension builds through dialogue, pauses, contradictions, and the increasing realization that neither character fully understands the other. That realization becomes the true breaking point. By the final act, the story stops being about escape and becomes about understanding what is real and what has been constructed. The audience is left in the same position as the characters, unable to fully confirm the truth of what has occurred. The ending of You'll Never Find Me refuses to offer clean answers. Instead, it leaves behind ambiguity, forcing viewers to reconstruct meaning from fragments of behavior, dialogue, and implication. That unresolved structure is intentional. Because the film is not trying to solve a mystery. It is trying to replicate the experience of being trapped inside one. And that is what makes it so effective. It reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying situations are not those filled with violence or monsters, but those where truth itself becomes unstable. When you cannot trust what is said. When you cannot trust what you see. And eventually, when you cannot even trust your own interpretation of events. If you enjoyed this analysis and ending explained, don't forget to subscribe to Movie Story Recaps, like, share, and comment which movie you want next.